Shabbat Shalom, Mo'adim L'Simcha, everyone. On this Shabbat, I want to focus a little bit on a line from the Haggadah that we've been talking about a lot, but I want to come at it from a more personal perspective, because I think actually the line is personal. We know in the Haggadah we say, B'chol dor vador, in every generation, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, we have to look at ourselves, see ourselves as if we left from Egypt. And I know this year, especially, at many of our Sedarim, at many of our Seders, we've been looking at this from a global perspective, from a Jewish people perspective, recognizing the fact that there are those of us, 133 to be exact, who are still in captivity right at this very moment. It's a different year, it's a different feeling. We look around at the anti-Jewish hatred, at all of that we see, it feels different than it has in past years. And I think many of us have talked about that at our Seder, have brought it up. Some of us had empty seats at our Seder tables to remember those people who are not with us right now and hoping that they'll be coming back. For us at our Seder, we had Tzachi Idan, the first night, a resident of Nachal Oz. We had Doron Steinbrecher, the second night, a member of Kfar Aza, both of whom are still in captivity. But I want to actually listen to the verse and say, wait a second, we have to consider ourselves as if we were there. Not our people, not understanding with empathy and sympathy the fact that there are those and we can feel for their families, but what does it mean for me to consider myself as if I was in Egypt? And I want to think about that not just from a physical perspective, because most of us living here in San Diego are not in a place where we have to think about physical enslavement. Most of us don't even have to think about sort of the other types of enslavements that very often we talk about, whether it be addiction, whether it be those sorts of things that sometimes we can talk about. I want to think about it from a spiritual perspective. What does it mean to be in Mitzrayim? And what does it mean to be freed from Mitzrayim, freed from Egypt? What do you think for us in 21st century San Diego? What does it mean? This is a pretty powerful imperative of our Haggadah, of our Seder experience, of our Passover experience. Anybody have any thoughts? I know you all better than this. You're not this quiet. Sophia. So this Pesach, because of all of that going around, you're saying it's affecting you personally, spiritually, because it takes some of, we're supposed to be rejoicing on our holidays. It's a little difficult to do that, knowing that that is there. And maybe Mitzrayim is that reduction of joy. Certainly as a slave, you could argue, life isn't very joyful, right? It still can be sweet, when we read people who come out of the Holocaust, when we read, some of the philosophers, who have written afterwards, even in the concentration camps, there were moments of sweetness in life. So life can still be sweet, but the situation puts a weight on everything. Okay, Alan.
Could be an awakening, spiritual awakening. So being in Egypt, you're asleep, you're not aware of spirituality or
I like that. So Alan is arguing that maybe it's a spiritual awakening, that being in Egypt, that sense of spiritual self is sort of asleep. 400 years of slavery shut all of that down. And, some of the rabbis even argue the fact that, God didn't forget the Jewish people, but the Jewish people might have forgotten God at that point in time, after 400 years. And leaving is that blossoming of that spirituality, that reawakening into it. Good. Hetty. Mm. Yeah, so what Hetty said is if one of us is not free, none of us are, and we're feeling the weight of that. We're feeling that it's affecting all of us, even though we ourselves are not in captivity, because some of us are. We're feeling that this Pesach. Michal? Yeah, I mean, the reality is, many of us, and certainly our parents' generation, really sort of felt like we'd finally made it. The Holocaust was over. We're here in the United States. Everything is good. Everything is over. And yet it seems to keep coming back. We're starting to hear similar things to what was going on. I just was reading before Shabbat an article from it was translated from a German newspaper of things that were going on the campuses, right, in Germany before all of this, before the Holocaust started, and how there's some eerie similarities that are going on there, and it just seems to keep coming back for us. Bob? It's hard to capture a moment in time like that is so great and say, well, you have to think about that, right? Whether it be any of these holidays, right? Positive or negative. I think it's difficult for us as human beings to kind of put ourselves back there. And we need that. The Seder helps us with the symbols. It helps us try to get back to that mindset. But I'm going to argue that we've been talking a little bit about the communal journey for the most part. I want to talk about the individual journey a little bit today. Because yes, Pesach is a communal holiday, but it's also a very important individual holiday for each of us. That's why this is written in the singular. It's not in every generation, you all must, I'm using the southern, you all must think of yourselves as if you all left from slavery, right? It's you and you and you, each one of us. And each one of us potentially has had a different experience. And how do we do that? And I want to lean into, one second, a quick comment? Yeah, go ahead. Because I'm going to move on to something else, so I figured I'd give you a chance. Yeah. So we have to move from a slave mentality to a free mentality. And I think a lot of times we absolutely put it in those terms. But for those of us who have lived in the United States and who've grown up here and grown up in freedom, for the most part, it's hard. And by the way, there are people within the United States who have a different narrative. But for us as Jews here in the United States, it's been different, right? The slave mentality to the freedom mentality is hard for us to grasp. I want to shift it a little bit. I want to shift it from a Mitzrayim mentality to a Yisrael mentality, right? And we see that very interestingly in Deuteronomy. We see it very interesting in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 11, verses 10 and 11, read as follows. For the land that you are about to enter and possess is not like Mitzrayim. It's not like the land of Egypt from which you have come. There, the grain you had sowed had to be watered by your own labors like a vegetable garden. But the land you are about to cross into and possess, a land of hills and valleys, soaks up its water from the rains of heaven. I'm going to leave the second part of it for the time being, the difference between a vegetable garden and being, watered from heaven. But the imagery of Mitzrayim, and the rabbis understood the word Mitzrayim, right, coming from the word Meitzar, or Tsar, right? We all know the song. Many of us know the song, Kol Haolam Kulo Geshem Tsar Me'od. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. Tsar means narrow. So Meitzar, Mitzrayim, the rabbis argue, means narrow spaces, tight, closed-in spaces. And we were sort of talking about that a little bit when we got this sense of this heaviness, right, of the oppression, that we're confined in this little space. We don't have the ability to be who we are, not just physically, but spiritually as well. Right? It's a parallel there. And Yisrael, what does Yisrael mean? Struggles with God, right? Yisrael, and the imagery here is hills and valleys, it's openness, right? So we go from this sense of confined, this sense of oppression, of being not able to move, to breathe, to spiritual freedom, to the sense of, wow, look at this view, right? That transition for us is, I believe, what this verse, Bechol Dor Vador, is asking us to do during Pesach, right? To find those places that we are constricted, right? Think about it almost like, Lahavdil, this just popped in my head, but going to a good massage, you've got muscles that are all cramped up and you're able to work that out and all of a sudden, wow, now I can move. And you may not have even realized how constricted you were, how restricted you were until after the massage. But all of a sudden now, oh, wow, that's amazing. So how do we do that spiritually? And I would argue that that's in the name Yisrael, right? That's in the name Yisrael. We argue it by thinking and challenging and pushing the boundaries. Anybody who's studied Talmud, if you study Talmud with me, we always talk about what are the boundaries, right? The Talmud doesn't usually say, this is the rule, this is the rule, this is the rule. The law codes come in later on and say that. But the Talmud, the way that it's built, says, all right, well, we're going to argue this until we get to a point where everybody agrees, well, that doesn't make any more sense. Fine, we stop there. Then we're going to argue this way until we get to, well, that doesn't make any sense. Fine, we're going to stop there. And everything in between is that free space that we can explore, that we can go to. And so I want us to think. I'm going to give us one image and then one challenge. I'm going to change holidays for a moment because it's such a wonderful image, right? I'm going to change holidays just for a moment to Rosh Hashanah and the shofar, right? The shofar is one of our traditional Jewish symbols. And if we look, actually, I'll cite from the Be'er Mayim Chayim, right? He's actually starts with the psalm that we read today in Hallel, Min HaMetzar Karatiyah. Now, usually it's from out of distress I call to you. But Metzar is that narrow place. So God, I'm calling to you from this narrow place, right? And he writes, he says, called upon the Lord, and he answered me with expansiveness. As the knowledgeable ones have written, this refers to the secret of the shofar, which is a speech that emerges from a confined place with great power. And when it reaches the open space, it spreads and it grows in strength and it sends higher and higher. This idea of a shofar, in order to make the noise, it starts at a very small, tight, confined place, and then it opens its way up. So this Pesach, I want to challenge us to find those places that are narrow for us. To go back to that, find those muscles that are just not allowing us to move the way we'd like to, the way we have to, in a spiritual realm, in our spiritual selves. And find some openness. And it may be different for everybody, right? It may be different. Some people like to go to the jacuzzi, and some people like to go to a massage, and some people take a leave. And okay, it's all there to help find us do that. We have to find our own way. But if we're going to truly understand this imperative from our Pesach Seder in every generation, we have to think of ourselves as if we were in Mitzrayim. We have to recognize those narrow places and find that path, that journey. Maybe it'll take us 40 years. But find that journey to those places of openness, to those places of relief, to those places of freedom. Any comments before we move into our Torah reading for today? All right, Shabbat Shalom, Moadim L'Simcha.